Guys, we are almost at the end of our journey. This is the WandaVision Episode 8 spoiler review. This will have spoilers all over it. You've been warned, so let's start talking about WandaVision Episode 8 before the finale next week of Episode 9. So WandaVision Episode 8, as I kind of thought in the last episode, was indeed a flashback episode. Kind of. It was a flashback episode, but not in the way that I thought they were going to do the flashbacks. So this episode starts off with the Salem witch trials. I think it was 1692, and it's Agatha. Agatha is being trialed by these covenant of witches. It turns out Agatha herself is a witch, and all these other witches are accusing her of stealing magic above her age, stealing dark magic and using it to her own power. Agatha denies their claims, but it looks like they're about to kill her as they shoot this magic into her, and she starts absorbing this magic, and you see that she's starting to suck the life out of all those that are trying to kill her. She's turning them into skeletons, like something fresh out of Indiana Jones that just fall to the ground dead. And they show it. They do not hide these pale, dead skeleton heads as they lay dead on the field. Only on the family streaming service, Disney+. So Agatha kills all these other witches, including the witch of her mother. And after she kills her mother, she takes off this brooch that she's wearing, and that's what we've seen Agatha wear throughout the entirety of WandaVision. From that flashback, we cut to present day, and we catch up with Agatha as she has Wanda trapped in her basement. And we learn from the last episode, it was Agatha all along. A little exaggerated. It was a little bit misleading because we find out that Agatha actually has no idea how Wanda is doing any of this. In fact, Agatha is really impressed and kind of baffled at Wanda's abilities. And she's interrogating Wanda, wanting to find out how she did this, because as Agatha kind of shows, she turns this fly into a bird, and she tells Wanda, that took me years of practice to get, while you're running illusions all the way at the end of town on autopilot. How are you doing this? This is way above where your magic should be, especially if you haven't studied. But Wanda is persistent and stands firm on her word that she has no idea how she did this. So Agatha decides that they need to take a trip down memory lane with Wanda to find out where exactly her power and how this all started. And that is where we kind of get a Christmas Carol kind of story with Agatha and Wanda, as Agatha takes Wanda through her traumatic past to try to uncover the secret of how Westview, how this hex and this reality that Wanda has created came to be. And from there, this episode really worked to kind of dive into Wanda's tragic and traumatic life. We first go to Sokovia, where we see young Wanda with young Pietro, and they're with their family, and it's family sitcom night, I guess. They have this case of all these old sitcoms of Malcolm in the Middle and Bewitched, and it's Wanda's turn to pick the sitcom, and she picks the Dick Van Dyke Show. And this segment really shows Wanda's love for sitcoms, and also kind of a nostalgic feel she has for sitcoms. They're kind of her escape into a happy place, a kind of memory she has with her family. And they're watching the Dick Van Dyke Show, and you start to see inspirations of where Wanda's reality came from. You see them sleeping in the two beds. You see very similar sets and very similar slapstick comedy to how people acted, especially in the first 2 episodes of WandaVision. And during this very peaceful, calm moment, the Stark missile hits. The Stark missile that we heard about in Age of Ultron that trapped Pietro and Wanda under the rubble for 2 days, and we get to see this scene actually play out. We see Pietro and Wanda, they're trapped in the rubble, and you see the Stark missile just sitting there, and it flashes, it beeps this red light that's very, very similar to the flashing of the red light on the toaster from the first commercial of episode 1. And Agatha watches this and says, so that missile just stayed there for 2 days? You put a probability hex on it. And Wanda's like, no, it just never went off. But Agatha is starting to have suspicions that Wanda has had powers in her long before the Infinity Stone. What we were told is that Wanda got her powers from the Mind Stone from Loki's staff. So to go further into investigating, Agatha takes Wanda to the experiments done on her by Strucker and Hydra, and we see Wanda in the same kind of getup that she was in at the end of the, I think it was Captain America Winter Soldier post-credit scene, where we see Pietro and Wanda in their cells, and Wanda's with the blocks, and Pietro's kind of going out of control, running around. And you see them in these dirty gray kind of shirts and pants. That's what Wanda's wearing when she comes out, and she's approaching Loki's staff. And as she's walking up to Loki's staff, the Mind Stone kind of comes out of the staff itself, and the Mind Stone unleashes its power onto Wanda. And we see during this moment that Wanda kind of has this vision, this hallucination of this figure coming out of the Mind Stone, and it looks like the silhouette of Wanda's costume, the Scarlet Witch from the comic books. It's very brief, it's very quick, and then Wanda just kind of collapses on the ground, And we later catch up with her in her cell, and she's once again watching sitcoms, going to her happy place. And the Hydra agents are watching the security footage, and all they see is Wanda standing there. The next thing they know, it jump cuts to her just on the ground. And they can't find the other footage, and they're very confused, which is kind of similar to how we see Wanda play in her reality. She'll take things out, she'll do her own little self-edits, and it's almost like she was doing this before the hex even began. So this is where Agatha's getting really suspicious, and she says, so the Mind Stone just amplified what otherwise would have died on the vine. So it sounds like Wanda, they're alluding, they're saying that Wanda had these, she's a witch. She had these witch powers, she had these abilities within her. They were just dormant, and if she didn't act on them, they were just gonna kind of die out. She would never have found them. And the Mind Stone didn't give Wanda her abilities, they just activated her abilities even more so than they were already. Which is a new revelation in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that they're doing with Wanda, and introducing a natural superpower. We haven't really seen that at all in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, someone who's just born with the powers. And so from there, we are taken to the Avengers facility from Civil War. We are introduced to Wanda as she is first freshly in the Avengers. She's in her room, and she's watching Malcolm in the Middle alone, and she's kind of grieving freshly over Pietro's death. And we see this is the first time that Wanda and Vision bond, because Wanda calls for Vision and he comes through the wall, which was a fun little callback that they did. And in one of my favorite moments of this episode, we see Wanda and Vision just sit down, and Wanda is talking to Vision about how she's feeling after Pietro's death. And Vision says that he can't really relate. He's never experienced loss. He's never loved someone to lose. And then he says this line, which is by far the most beautiful line in probably the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe.
But what is grief, if not love persevering? And
you really see that hit Wanda. It's the first time you can tell that she's really felt comforted after Quicksilver's death. And you really see that that is the first time that that's where the Wanda and Vision bond started. That was the origin of it. And it was just such a beautiful moment, and I really liked getting to see more of those characters before this whole Wanda's reality, and just really getting more backstory and more filled in on their relationship. It's a really sweet moment, and it was one of my favorites in the episode. And after this scene, Agatha's like, we're so close, I know we're almost there. Let's recap. Your parents are dead, your brother's dead, Vision's dead. And you see that hit Wanda. She's like, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to do this anymore. And Agatha goes, Vision was dead, and you wanted him back. Immediately after that line, we were taken to Sword Headquarters, where we see a fresh Wanda off of Endgame walk into Sword Headquarters, and she goes to the head desk, and she's like, I know you guys have Vision. When I came back, the body was gone, and I know he's here. Which is like when she dusted in Infinity War, she was over Vision's body. When she came back 5 years later, she probably came back in Wakanda, and there was no Vision. So after the events of Endgame, she goes to this place, and she's like, I want to see Vision's body. I want it back. I want to have a funeral for him. He deserves it. I deserve it. She goes to the door, and he's like, I gotta buzz you in. And she's like, don't bother. And she just blasts the door open, and she goes down the hallway, and she meets up with Hayward in his office, where he shows her that they have Vision in an operating kind of room, and they are dismantling the body. And Wanda's like, why are you showing me this? I just want to take him and bury him. I just want to have a funeral. And Hayward's like, we can't let you take him. He's government property. He's $3 billion worth of vibranium. We can't let you just put that in the ground. But Hayward does tell Wanda, not everyone has the power to bring their soulmate back online. Which it's almost like he's kind of planting the idea in Wanda's head, hey, maybe you could bring Vision back, because even Wanda says, I couldn't do that. But she says it like she's questioning it, but could I? Could I do that? And she says to Hayward, he's all I have. And Hayward says to her, that's just the thing. He's not yours. And that really ignites Wanda. She blasts through the glass, and she jumps down to go see Vision. And this is the most heartbreaking scene in the whole episode, because as you've seen in Infinity War, when Wanda and Vision were away together, and Vision was feeling like the Mind Stone was kind of giving him headaches, or it was talking to him, she would do that hand wavy thing on it and say, all I can feel is you. We see her go to Vision's dead body, the top of his dead head, and she's trying to do the same thing that she did on the Mind Stone. And she just breaks down crying, and she says, I can't feel you. And this was some of Elizabeth Olsen's best acting in the entire show of WandaVision. I loved this scene so much. It was so heartbreaking. I was like, oh, it hit me right in the feels. I was like, oh my goodness, that's just so sad. That really got me. But what's really interesting is after that scene, she leaves and she goes back to her car, and she doesn't have Vision's body. That whole thing that we saw in episode 4 or 5, I think it was episode 5, where Hayward said that Wanda broke into the sword facility and stole Vision's body. That was a flat out lie. She never took the body. She just walked out and she goes to her vehicle, and in the passenger seat is this letter that's sitting there, and we see her drive and we see her enter Westview before the Hex, before she took over Westview. We see her drive in there. And Westview, it doesn't look great. It's not a great looking city. It's very pale, kind of dingy looking. And Wanda drives in there and she finds this field of grass with some cement block base around it. And she opens up the letter, and in the middle of the page is a message from Vision that says, "For us to grow old in." So he had bought this house in Westview that he was planning on building, I guess, for him and Wanda to live their lives in. And you see, this is where Wanda's grief and her tragic life and her traumas up until this point just completely take her over. And from that grief and from that trauma, just emerges the Hex. All this power comes shooting out of Wanda, and you see the Hex be born. You see the wave of power go over Westview, over the city, and you see it transform into the black and white sitcom land that we have seen since episode 1. And also out of that power, we see come out of Wanda is a Vision. Vision is created from Wanda's power. It was like red and yellow. It looked like it was created from a mixture of Wanda's power and the Infinity Stone from the Mind Stone. And you see this Vision get created as the room goes black and white. And eventually Wanda joins the environment and she turns black and white. And we see how everything began. It was from Wanda from the start. It was born out of her grief and her trauma. And this Vision that we've been following within Wanda's reality is just a manifestation from all of that grief and that trauma. And after that final flashback, and we get caught up with how everything came to be, Wanda's reality kind of finally breaks, and we actually see her house as a set. We see the lights, we see the cameras, and in the audience we see Agatha clapping and saying bravo as she disappears. And next thing you know, we hear Wanda's children, because we haven't seen Wanda's children throughout this entire episode. Agatha mentions that she has them captured in her chamber of the basement, but we never saw the children until eventually at the end of this episode, Wanda runs outside, and in the streets we see Agatha floating above the ground in her attire, in her probably original witch attire, and she's got the children by the throats with this magic, and she's hovering above them, and Wanda's getting ready to fight, and Agatha says to her, "You have no idea what you are, Wanda. This is chaos magic. You don't know how dangerous you really are. You are a Scarlet Witch." Da da da! End of the episode. The credits roll. But once again, this episode, like last episode, has a post-credit scene, and we catch up with Hayward and the Sword Organization, and they say that Hayward's weapon is finally ready to be launched. And what is Hayward's weapon but a rebuilt Vision? He's completely white. He's like pale white. And his eyes look like those who were under Loki's mind control with the staff. He had those kind of eyes from the first Avengers film. And that's where we end. So that was WandaVision episode 8, which I will admit didn't give too much more this episode. This episode was very, very light on kind of the reveals. Besides finding out how Wanda made the Hex and made this reality, and finding out that she's actually like a born witch, there wasn't too much in this episode that like you could really grab onto. There was some really good moments. It was really cool going back in time and seeing the Stark missile that kept Pietro and Wanda there for 2 days, and how that came to be. That adds a new angle to that story when you watch Age of Ultron. It was cool seeing the beginning of Wanda and Vision's bond as they were in the Avengers facility, and Vision was giving her some comfort after Pietro's death. And now we know that Hayward was lying about Wanda stealing Vision's body, so there's some mystery there. But this episode didn't answer too many questions. There's still a lot of questions going into episode 9. What about the kids? Can the kids exist outside the Hex? We know that Vision can't because he's just a manifestation from within the Hex. We don't know what happened with Monica and Pietro. They never showed up again in this episode. We don't know what Darcy's doing. We don't know what's up with Vision. Vision never showed up in this episode. This episode was solely focused on exploring Wanda's traumatic past. And this was Elizabeth Olsen's episode. I really sincerely hope that Elizabeth Olsen wins an Emmy for this show, because this episode alone was just so great. Her acting and her performance as Wanda was some of the best it's ever been, might be the best it's ever been in the whole cinematic universe of Marvel. And guys, with only one episode left to go of WandaVision, I cannot wait to see how all these answers and questions finally get resolved. It's very bittersweet to see this show end, but I'm really excited to see if they can pull this off. Anyway, guys, those are all my thoughts, opinions, and recap of WandaVision Episode 8. What did you guys think of this episode? Comment down below, let me know. I want to know all your thoughts and opinions about this episode. And guys, we only have one episode left of WandaVision, so be sure to come on back next week. Subscribe so that you don't miss it, as we will be talking about the finale of WandaVision. As always, guys, thank you so much for clicking on this video and checking out my channel. Once again, my name is Zachary Milne. Thank you for talking movies with me, and I hope you have yourself a great day.